I'm Madison, 29, and my life just took an unexpected turn when my sister Heather got engaged. During dinner last night, my parents announced they're giving her $100,000 for the wedding. Then they turned to me and casually mentioned they could only offer $5,000 if I ever marry my boyfriend Ryan of 5 years. The look they gave me suggested this was completely reasonable. My mind is still reeling from the shock. If you're watching this, please hit subscribe and let me know where you're viewing from. I'd love to know I'm not alone in this situation. To understand why my parents' wedding fund announcement hit me like a ton of bricks, you need to know more about my family. We grew up in Brookline, an affluent suburb of Boston, in a beautiful colonial-style home with manicured gardens and a 2-car garage. My father Richard is a successful corporate attorney with a corner office downtown, while my mother Elaine runs her own interior design business catering to Boston's elite. Our childhood was comfortable by most standards: private schools, summer camps, and family vacations to Europe. From an early age, it was clear that Heather was the golden child. 2 years younger than me, she was the outgoing, vivacious daughter who commanded attention in any room. With her perfect blonde curls, sparkling blue eyes, and infectious laugh, she was the spitting image of my mother in her youth. Heather was always surrounded by friends, invited to every party, and praised for her social grace and charm. I, on the other hand, was the studious, practical one. With my father's dark hair and serious demeanor, I preferred books to parties and deep conversations to small talk. While not unattractive, I lacked Heather's effortless beauty and magnetic personality. I was reliable, responsible Madison, the one who always did what was expected without complaint. The pattern of favoritism was subtle but persistent throughout our childhood. When we went clothes shopping, Heather would get new outfits from trendy boutiques, while I got practical basics or hand-me-downs. "You're just not as interested in fashion," my mother would explain when I questioned the disparity. For birthdays, Heather would receive extravagant parties with professional planners, while mine were simple family gatherings. "You prefer things low-key," they'd rationalize. Even in academics, where I excelled, the recognition felt different. When I brought home straight A's, my parents would nod approvingly and say, "That's our Madison, always dependable." But when Heather managed to pull AB average, they'd celebrate as though she'd won a Nobel Prize. "She works so hard despite not being naturally academic," they'd gush to relatives. College only amplified these differences. I graduated summa cum laude with a nursing degree, working part-time throughout to minimize student loans. Heather barely scraped through a communications degree at a more expensive private university, changing majors 3 times and taking 5 years to finish. My parents covered all her expenses without question. After graduation, I pursued a career as a pediatric nurse, working my way up to a respectable position at Boston Children's Hospital. I love my job. It's challenging, meaningful work that makes a real difference in children's lives. Heather, meanwhile, bounced between various jobs in PR and marketing, never lasting more than a year before deciding it wasn't fulfilling her potential. Each time she quit, my parents supported her financially during her finding herself periods. My boyfriend Ryan and I have been together for 5 years, after meeting at a mutual friend's birthday party. He's a kindergarten teacher, with a gentle soul and patient demeanor. We live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Jamaica Plain, carefully saving for a down payment on a house someday. We budget diligently, cook at home, and take affordable weekend trips rather than lavish vacations. My parents have always seemed to view our relationship as sensible rather than exciting. In contrast, Heather met Tyler at an upscale charity gala 2 years ago. He works in finance, comes from family money, and drives a sports car that costs more than Ryan's annual salary. They live in a luxury condo in Back Bay that his parents helped them purchase. Their relationship is a whirlwind of exclusive restaurants, weekend getaways to the Hamptons, and social media posts from glamorous locations. My parents adore Tyler and frequently comment on what a perfect match he and Heather make. Despite all this, I've genuinely tried to maintain a good relationship with my sister. We have our differences, but she's still my only sibling, and I want her to be happy. When she called me screaming with excitement about Tyler's proposal, complete with professional photographer hiding in the bushes at the public garden, I was sincerely happy for her. I just had no idea how much that engagement would expose the true extent of my parents' favoritism. The engagement dinner at my parents' house was an elaborate affair, despite being billed as a small family celebration. Mom had spent the day preparing Heather's favorite dishes: filet mignon, truffle mashed potatoes, and roasted asparagus. The dining room table was set with the fine china reserved for special occasions, crystal wine glasses sparkling under the chandelier light. A professional floral arrangement of white roses and lilies dominated the center of the table. When Heather and Tyler arrived, she practically floated into the room, her left hand prominently displayed to show off the enormous diamond ring that caught the light with every gesture. It was at least 3 carats, set in platinum with smaller diamonds along the band. Tyler followed behind, his confident smile and designer suit perfectly complementing Heather's elegant cocktail dress. "Madison. Can you believe it?" Heather squealed, embracing me tightly. "I'm going to be Mrs. Tyler Blackwell." "It's beautiful," I said honestly, admiring the ring. "Congratulations to both of you." Ryan stood beside me in his nicest button-down shirt and slacks, looking somewhat out of place in the formal setting, but genuinely happy for my sister. He shook Tyler's hand warmly and offered his congratulations. Throughout dinner, Heather dominated the conversation with details of the proposal, how Tyler had arranged for a string quartet, how he'd gotten down on one knee beside the swan boats, how strangers had applauded. My parents hung on every word, interjecting with delighted gasps at appropriate moments. "The photographer got the most amazing shots," Heather gushed. "I've already got 500 likes on Instagram." As dessert was served a champagne cake from an exclusive bakery, Dad tapped his glass for a toast. His eyes were misty as he looked at Heather. "From the moment you were born, Princess, we knew you were destined for something special," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Tyler, we couldn't have picked a better man for our little girl. You two are perfect together, and your mother and I couldn't be happier." He paused, exchanging a meaningful glance with my mother before continuing. "Which is why we want to make a special announcement. Elaine and I would like to give you both a wedding gift. We're setting aside $100,000 for you to create the wedding of your dreams." Heather's squeal of delight nearly shattered the crystal. She jumped up to hug both my parents, tears streaming down her face. "Oh my God. That's amazing. We can have the Rosewood Hotel ballroom after all." I felt Ryan's hand squeeze mine under the table as I maintained my smile. I was happy for my sister, truly I was, but I couldn't help feeling a familiar twinge in my chest, that same hollow feeling I'd experienced so many times growing up. Later, as I was helping Mom clean up in the kitchen, while Heather showed Ryan and Tyler her old photo albums in the living room, Mom casually dropped the bombshell. "Of course, honey, we'd give you the same, but you and Ryan will probably just have something small anyway," she said, handing me a plate to dry. "You've always been the practical one. Besides, Heather needs a big wedding, it's important for Tyler's family connections." I nearly dropped the plate. "Mom, Ryan and I haven't even talked about getting married yet." "Oh, I know, sweetie," she patted my arm condescendingly. "But when you do, we've set aside $5,000 for you. That should be plenty for a nice backyard reception, don't you think?" I couldn't find words to respond. 20 times less. They valued Heather's wedding at 20 times what they thought mine was worth. I mechanically continued drying dishes, grateful when Heather called for Mom to join them in looking at potential wedding venues on Tyler's iPad. On the drive home, Ryan waited until we were several blocks away before speaking. "Are you okay?" That was a lot to take in. "I'm fine," I said automatically, staring out the window at the passing streetlights. "It's their money. They can do what they want with it." "Madison," Ryan's voice was gentle but firm. "It's okay to be hurt by that. The disparity is pretty shocking." "It's just how it's always been," I said, fighting back tears. "Heather's the special one, and I'm the sensible one. They've always spent more on her." "That doesn't make it right," Ryan replied. "A parent's love shouldn't have different price tags for different children." "They love me in their way," I insisted, though the words sounded hollow even to me. "Besides, they're right. We wouldn't want some extravagant wedding anyway." "That's not the point," Ryan said, but he could see I wasn't ready to discuss it further. That night, I lay awake long after Ryan had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling and wondering why, after all these years, I still felt like I was constantly falling short in my parents' eyes. Despite my education, my stable career helping children, my healthy relationship, nothing ever seemed to measure up to Heather's effortless ability to be exactly what my parents wanted. As tears silently rolled down my cheeks, I told myself that I was being childish, that I was too old to be crying over such things, but the ache in my chest wouldn't subside. 2 weeks after the engagement dinner, my phone rang while I was charting at work. Heather's name flashed on the screen, and I stepped into the break room to answer. "Madison." "Oh my God. I've been thinking all morning you have to be my maid of honor." Heather's voice bubbled with excitement. "You're my only sister, and even though we're so different, I can't imagine anyone else standing next to me." Despite my complicated feelings about the wedding fund situation, warmth spread through my chest. For all our differences, Heather was reaching out, wanting to include me in this significant moment. "Of course I will," I answered, genuinely touched. "I'd be honored." "Amazing. Mom's taking me and a few friends to lunch at Serafina to start planning. Can you get away from the hospital? It's at noon." I glanced at my schedule. I was due for a lunch break anyway, and the restaurant was only a 10-minute walk. "I'll be there." Serafina was one of Boston's trendiest Italian restaurants, where securing a reservation typically required weeks of advance planning. Yet somehow, my mother had arranged a table for 6 with just a day's notice. When I arrived, slightly rushed and still in my scrubs, the rest of the party was already seated at a prime table by the window. Heather, my mother, and 3 of Heather's friends from her sorority days. "Madison, darling, we ordered you a salad," my mother said as I slid into the remaining seat. "We assumed you'd want something light since you're coming from work." I nodded thanks, though I was actually starving after a busy morning at the hospital. Around me, everyone else had full plates of pasta and glasses of expensive champagne. "So, as I was saying," Heather continued, barely pausing to acknowledge my arrival, "Tyler and I are thinking Napa Valley for the venue. His parents have connections at an amazing vineyard there." "Destination wedding," squealed Brittany, one of the bridesmaids. "That's so perfect for you two. We found the most incredible place," my mother chimed in, pulling up photos on her iPad. "Sweeping views of the vineyards, space for 200 guests, farm-to-table catering. What's the price point on something like that?" I asked, trying to be practical. Destination weddings can get pretty expensive for guests. The table fell silent for a moment, all eyes turning to me. "Well, that's the beauty of the budget your parents have provided," said Heather with a slight edge to her voice. "We can arrange group rates at nearby hotels and possibly even help with some travel costs for the wedding party." They're quoting around $35,000 just for the venue, my mother added, but it includes so much, and the photos will be absolutely spectacular. I nearly choked on my water. $35,000 just for the venue. That was more than Ryan and I had managed to save for a house down payment after 3 years of aggressive saving. Have you considered something local? I suggested. Boston has some beautiful historic venues, and more family and friends could attend without the travel expense. My mother and Heather exchanged a look that I recognized all too well. The Madison is being difficult look I'd seen throughout childhood. Honey, this is Heather's special day, Mom said in the patient tone she reserved for explaining why my suggestions weren't quite right. The Napa venue perfectly captures the elegant, sophisticated atmosphere they're going for. The conversation quickly moved on to discussions of designer dresses, custom invitations, and a live band versus a celebrity DJ. I offered a few more suggestions: a talented local photographer I knew, a bakery famous for delicious, but reasonably priced wedding cakes. But each idea was dismissed with polite smiles and quick pivots back to more extravagant options. About halfway through lunch, I excused myself to use the restroom. As I was in the stall, I heard the door open and recognized my mother's and Heather's voices. I know she means well, Heather was saying, her voice echoing slightly in the marble bathroom, but Madison just doesn't get it. She has no vision for something of this scale. She's always been that way, my mother replied with a sigh. So practical it borders on killjoy sometimes. I love her dearly, but she just doesn't understand that some occasions call for splendor. Should I have asked someone else to be maid of honor? Heather asked, uncertainty creeping into her voice. I don't want someone raining on my parade at every planning session. No, she's your sister, my mother assured her. We'll just need to be firm about the decisions. She'll come around once she sees how magnificent everything will be. I remained frozen in the stall, my cheeks burning with humiliation. I waited until they left before emerging, taking several deep breaths while staring at my reflection in the mirror. The familiar pain of being the family disappointment washed over me, but I pushed it down, splashed cold water on my face, and returned to the table with a plastered-on smile. That evening, curled up on our worn but comfortable couch with Ryan, I finally let the emotions out. $35,000 for just the venue, I said, still unable to wrap my head around it. That's almost our entire house down payment. Ryan pulled me closer. It's a lot of money. And they're talking about designer dresses, flying in a photographer from New York, custom everything. I continued. Meanwhile, we're counting pennies, trying to pay off student loans, saving for a future that feels increasingly out of reach. We're doing okay, Madison, Ryan reminded me gently. We have each other, jobs we love, this apartment. I know, I sighed. And I should be happy for Heather. It's not about the money itself. It's just, why am I always made to feel like my choices, my life, are somehow less worthy of celebration or investment? Why is being responsible a character flaw in my family? Ryan was quiet for a moment, his fingers gently stroking my hair. Have you ever considered that your parents might be the ones with the flawed perspective? That perhaps the values they prioritize, appearances, status, grand gestures, aren't actually the ones that lead to fulfillment? I considered this, looking around our modest apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and filled with books, plants, and mementos from our relationship. We'd painted the walls ourselves, rescued our dining table from a thrift store, and restored it together, and picked out each piece with care rather than prestige in mind. I know you're right, I admitted. But there's still this part of me, this little girl part, that wants my parents to be as proud of me as they are of Heather. To see value in who I am rather than wishing I were different. I see your value, Ryan said simply. Every day, I see it. The children you care for at the hospital see it. The friends who call you first when they are in crisis see it. I nestled closer to him, grateful for his steady presence yet still unable to shake the feeling that in my family's eyes, I would always be the supporting character in Heather's story, useful, but unremarkable. 3 months flew by in a whirlwind of wedding planning texts, calls, and meetings. Despite my hurt feelings, I took my maid of honor duties seriously. I researched bridal shower venues within my budget, created handmade decorations, and spent evenings after long hospital shifts addressing invitations and assembling favor bags. I'd found a charming tea room that would allow us to bring our own decorations to keep costs down, and had carefully budgeted $500 for the entire event, a significant amount for me, but manageable with some overtime shifts. The menu would feature elegant finger sandwiches, scones, and a selection of fine teas. I'd even convinced a nursing colleague, who did calligraphy, as a hobby, to create beautiful place cards and a welcome sign. A week before the shower, my mother called. "Madison, I stopped by the tea room today," she began without preamble. "It's quaint, but I've made some executive decisions." My stomach tightened. "What kind of decisions?" "I've arranged for their premium champagne package, upgraded the menu to include seafood canapés and their signature petit fours, and ordered professional flower arrangements for each table." "Mom, that wasn't in my budget," I protested. "I had everything planned carefully." "Don't worry about the cost," she said dismissively. "Consider it my contribution." "Oh, and I've invited a few more of my friends and Tyler's mother's social circle. The final count will be 4 to 5 instead of 20. 4 to 5? I gasped. The room I reserved only fits 25 comfortably. I spoke with the manager. They can rearrange to accommodate everyone, though it will be cozy. I've also hired a photographer. Heather needs professional photos for a proper bridal shower. By the end of the call, my carefully planned $500 event had ballooned to over $2,000, with me still responsible for decorations, games, and party favors for nearly twice the number of guests. I ended up putting the additional expenses on my credit card, something Ryan and I had agreed to avoid except in emergencies. The day of the shower arrived, bright and clear. I'd been up since dawn, arranging flowers, hanging delicate paper lanterns, and setting up a memory table with photos of Heather throughout the years. Despite the budget strain and my mother's takeover, I was determined to make the day special for my sister. Initially, everything went well. The tea room looked beautiful, and Heather seemed genuinely delighted by the atmosphere. The guests? A mix of Heather's friends, family friends, and Tyler's connections mingled over champagne and tea. I caught occasional whispers comparing the shower to others they'd attended at more upscale venues, but chose to ignore them. The gift opening portion revealed the true wealth disparity among the attendees. Heather's college friends and colleagues gave typical shower gifts, expensive, but reasonable lingerie sets, spa packages, and kitchen appliances. Then came the gifts from Tyler's circle: a Hermes throw blanket, crystal champagne flutes from Tiffany, and a weekend couples retreat at a luxury spa. My parents' gift was presented last, an envelope that Heather opened with theatrical anticipation. "Oh my God," she squealed, pulling out documents and a brochure. "A honeymoon in Bora Bora. Overwater bungalow for 10 days. Mom, Dad, this is incredible." The room erupted in approving murmurs and exclamations. I tried to maintain my smile, while mentally calculating that this additional gift likely cost at least $15,000, 3 times what my parents had allocated for my entire future wedding. When it was my turn, I handed Heather a large gift box. Inside was a handmade album I'd spent weeks creating, filled with photos of us growing up together, tickets from concerts we'd attended, and other mementos of our relationship, along with a silver picture frame engraved with "Sisters Forever." Heather lifted the album, flipping through a few pages with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How thoughtful," she said, quickly setting it aside to reach for the next gift, a designer handbag from one of her bridesmaids. "You could display it at the wedding," I suggested, trying to hide my disappointment at her lukewarm reaction. "There's space for guests to write messages to." "Maybe," she replied vaguely, already exclaiming over the handbag. I caught my mother's expression. A fleeting grimace of embarrassment quickly covered with a bright smile as she turned to the guest beside her. "Madison has always been so crafty," she said in a tone that made it clear this wasn't entirely a compliment. Later, as guests were enjoying dessert, I overheard my mother speaking with my aunt near the beverage station. "The shower turned out lovely despite the venue constraints," my aunt was saying. "Though I'm surprised Madison chose something so modest." "Madison has always been the practical one, not the special one," my mother replied, her voice lowered but still audible to me. "We've accepted that she'll never have Heather's flair or understanding of proper social occasions." Something broke inside me at those words. I quietly excused myself, walking with measured steps to the bathroom where I locked myself in a stall and finally allowed silent tears to fall. Not the special one. After all these years, all my achievements, all my efforts to be the good daughter, that's how my mother saw me, as fundamentally less than Heather. I composed myself, reapplied my makeup, and returned to host the remainder of the shower with a fixed smile. I made sure every guest was attended to, that Heather was properly celebrated, that all gifts were recorded for thank you notes. I was the perfect maid of honor on the outside while feeling increasingly hollow within. When I finally arrived home that evening, Ryan had prepared my favorite comfort meal, homemade mac and cheese with a side of roasted vegetables. The simple thoughtfulness of the gesture, noticing what would bring me joy and quietly making it happen, contrasted so sharply with my family's dismissal of my efforts that I burst into tears the moment I closed our apartment door. "That bad?" Ryan asked, immediately enfolding me in his arms. I couldn't even speak at first, just sobbed against his shoulder. When I finally caught my breath, the words poured out. The shower takeover, the extravagant gifts, the honeymoon announcement, and most painfully, my mother's casual dismissal of me as not the special one. I've spent my entire life trying to earn their approval by being responsible, by making smart choices, by not asking for too much, I cried. And all it's gotten me is being the daughter they settled for rather than the one they celebrate. Ryan's expression darkened in a way I rarely saw from my gentle, patient partner. "Madison, you are extraordinary. You save children's lives. You build genuine connections with everyone you meet. You make thoughtful, meaningful gestures like that beautiful album. If they can't see how special you are, that's their failure, not yours. Maybe we should just distance ourselves," I whispered. "Stop trying so hard with people who will never value me as I am." "That might be healthiest," Ryan agreed, stroking my hair. "Sometimes the family we choose is more nurturing than the one we're born into." I nodded against his chest, emotionally exhausted but feeling, for the first time, that perhaps the problem wasn't that I was unworthy of celebration, but that my family was incapable of seeing beyond their narrow definition of success. 6 weeks before the wedding, I received a calendar invitation for the official bridal gown selection day at Eliza's Bridal Boutique, Boston's most exclusive wedding dress salon. The guest list included my mother, grandmother, both my aunts, all 5 bridesmaids, and me. A note mentioned that champagne and catered lunch would be provided for what promised to be a magical all-day experience. The boutique occupied the entire second floor of a historic brownstone on Newbury Street. When I arrived, slightly late due to a last-minute patient need at the hospital, everyone else was already settled in a luxurious private salon area. Crystal champagne flutes sparkled, elegant hors d'oeuvres were arranged on silver platters, and a personal consultant named Vivienne was explaining their white glove service process. "We have pre-selected gowns, based on Heather's Pinterest board and your mother's guidance," Vivienne explained in a French-tinged accent. "Each dress will be presented individually, and Heather will have time to consider how each one makes her feel before moving to the next." What followed was essentially a fashion show, with Heather emerging from the dressing room in increasingly elaborate gowns. The first few were classic A-line silhouettes that Heather dismissed as too simple. Next came mermaid styles with intricate beading, ball gowns with dramatic trains, and modern designs with unexpected details. "I want something that makes a statement," Heather declared. "Something unforgettable." The price tags on these dresses started at $5,000 and climbed steadily upward. Each time Vivienne discreetly mentioned a price, my mother would wave her hand dismissively as if money were no object. Meanwhile, I was calculating how many night shifts I'd need to work to pay off the credit card debt from the bridal shower. Finally, Heather emerged in what she declared the one. A custom couture gown with hand-beaded lace, a dramatic cathedral train, and a bodice adorned with Swarovski crystals. As she twirled before the mirrors, everyone gasped appropriately. "It's magnificent," my mother breathed. "Absolutely perfect." "The price point for this Marchesa original is $15,000, Vivienne said softly. "But for a bride who was destined to wear such a gown, can we really put a price on perfection?" I couldn't help the small sound of surprise that escaped my lips. $15,000 for a dress worn once. That amount would cover almost an entire year of my student loan payments. Heather's eyes narrowed slightly at my reaction. "What, Madison? You don't like it?" "No, it's beautiful," I said quickly. "It's just, that's a lot for a dress." "Madison," my mother said with a warning tone. "This is Heather's special day." "I know, but..." "Let's discuss this privately," my mother said firmly, gesturing for me to follow her to a small sitting area separated from the main salon by a decorative screen. Once we were seated on the plush velvet settee, my mother took a deep breath. "Madison, I think it's time we had a frank conversation." Something in her tone made me brace myself. "Your father and I have always had separate wedding funds for you and Heather," she began. "And yes, hers has always been larger." "Why?" The question emerged before I could stop it. "Because she needs it more," my mother said as if this were obvious. "Heather has different expectations, different social circles. Her wedding isn't just a personal celebration, it's a social statement that will help establish her and Tyler in certain circles. And my relationship with Ryan doesn't merit the same investment." I challenged. My mother sighed. "That's not what I mean. You're smart and responsible, Madison. You always have been. You don't need our help the way Heather does. You make sensible choices. You live within your means. So I'm being punished for being responsible." "Not punished. We're just allocating resources where they are most needed." She patted my hand condescendingly. "The $5,000 we're offering you is quite generous for the kind of wedding you and Ryan would have anyway. Something simple, I imagine." My chest tightened. "Have you ever considered that maybe I'd like something special too? That just because I'm practical doesn't mean I don't also want to feel valued and celebrated." "Of course you're valued," my mother said, looking genuinely confused by my reaction. "But let's be realistic about expectations. Ryan is a kindergarten teacher. You're a nurse. Your wedding would naturally be more modest. More modest, or less important. That's not fair, Madison. What's not fair is learning that my entire life, you and Dad have been saving for Heather's wedding but not mine. What's not fair is hearing that my relationship is considered less worthy of celebration, because Ryan doesn't come from money or work in finance." "Now you're just being dramatic," my mother said, her voice cooling. This is exactly why we've always had to handle you and Heather differently. She accepts things graciously, while you turn everything into a grievance. Something inside me snapped. Years of swallowed hurt, of telling myself to be understanding, of accepting less than Heather as my due, it all came rushing to the surface. No, Mom. What I'm being is honest for the first time, I said, my voice rising despite the semi-public setting. My entire life, I've watched you and Dad favor Heather more attention, more praise, more money, more everything. I told myself it was because she needed it more, that I was stronger, that your love was equal even if your treatment wasn't. But it's not true, is it? You just love her more. Madison. My mother looked around anxiously, aware that our conversation was becoming audible to the others. Keep your voice down. You're making a scene. Yes, God forbid I make a scene. That would be so unlike the practical, invisible daughter. I stood up, hands shaking. The problem isn't that I want an expensive wedding. The problem is that you've never valued me as much as you value Heather, and this is just the final proof. By now, Heather had approached in her $15,000 gown, a look of concern mixed with embarrassment on her face. What's going on? Your sister is having some sort of breakdown, my mother said. I'm having a moment of clarity, I corrected. Heather, I'm happy for you. I really am. I hope you have the wedding of your dreams. But I can't pretend anymore that this is normal or okay. Madison, you're ruining this special moment, Heather said, tears welling in her eyes. Why do you always have to overthink everything? Just be happy for me. I've spent my entire life being happy for you, I replied, grabbing my purse. Just once. I wanted my parents to be as proud of me as they are of you. To think I was worth the same investment. But clearly, that's never going to happen. I turned and walked out of the boutique, ignoring my mother's calls to come back and be reasonable. On the street, I walked aimlessly for hours, ignoring the buzzing phone in my pocket, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. I had never stood up to my family like that before, never allowed myself to acknowledge the depth of hurt their treatment had caused me. By the time I finally made it home, the sun was setting and Ryan was pacing anxiously in the living room. Your mom called me, he said as soon as I walked in. She said you had some kind of meltdown at the dress shop. Is that what she called it? I laughed bitterly, dropping onto the couch. A meltdown? Of course. What happened? Ryan sat beside me, taking my hands in his. I finally said what I've been feeling my entire life, I told him, recounting the conversation in detail. I just couldn't take it anymore, being told so clearly that I'm less worthy of celebration, that my choices make me less valuable, that my relationship with you is somehow second-rate, because we're not flashy or wealthy. Ryan pulled me into a tight embrace. I'm so proud of you for standing up for yourself. For us. I don't know what happens now, I admitted. I've never confronted them like this before. Whatever happens, we face it together, Ryan said. And Madison. You've always been the special one to me. Every single day. I buried my face against his shoulder, and finally allowed myself to fully feel the grief of never having been enough for my parents, while simultaneously experiencing the liberation of finally acknowledging that truth out loud. The next morning, I woke to a text from my father. Your mother is very upset. We need to talk. Come by the house at 4 p.m. Just you. I showed Ryan the message. What do you think? I think you should go, but only if you feel ready, he replied. And I'll be waiting right here when you get back. When I pulled into my parents' driveway that afternoon, my stomach was in knots. The house looked exactly as it always had, perfectly maintained, welcoming from the outside. Yet it felt different now, Like I was seeing clearly for the first time the facade of perfection that had always hidden the truth of our family dynamics. My father opened the door before I could knock. "Madison," he said simply, stepping aside to let me in. In the living room, my mother sat perched on the edge of her favorite armchair, her posture rigid with disapproval. "Sit down, please," my father said, gesturing to the sofa across from my mother. He took a seat beside her, presenting a united front. "I understand you caused quite a scene yesterday," he began, his attorney voice in full effect. "Your mother was deeply embarrassed in front of the entire bridal salon." "I'm sorry it happened that way," I said carefully. "But I'm not sorry for what I said." My father's eyebrows rose. "Explain." Taking a deep breath, I laid out what I'd been holding back for years. "All my life, I've watched Heather receive more attention, more celebration, more investment, more everything. When I found out you'd been saving $100,000 for her wedding, but only $5,000 for mine, it just confirmed what I've always suspected, that in this family, I'm considered less worthy." "That's ridiculous," my father said immediately. "We love you both equally. We've just always recognized that you and Heather have different needs." "Different needs, or different value to you?" I challenged. "Madison, that's not fair," my mother interjected. "We've always been very proud of your accomplishments." "Have you?" "Because I can't remember the last time you bragged about me the way you constantly brag about Heather. I graduated with highest honors, work saving children's lives, maintain a healthy relationship, manage my finances responsibly, and for that, I'm rewarded with 1/20th of what you give Heather for making none of those choices." My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Madison, we're just being practical. You've always been the sensible one." "That's exactly the problem, Dad. You've boxed me into this role of the sensible one as an excuse to expect less for me and give less to me. Being responsible shouldn't mean being less valued." My father and mother exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. "We may have unintentionally created some disparities over the years," my father admitted reluctantly. "But it was never about loving one of you more than the other." "Really?" "Because when I think about it, you've probably spent 3 times as much on Heather over our lifetimes. Her private university, that took 5 years while I worked through nursing school. Her condo down payment while I rent. Her luxury car while I take the tea. And now, her $100,000 wedding while I get essentially a pat on the head and a token amount." My mother's face flushed with irritation. "You're being ungrateful. Many people don't get any help from their parents for a wedding. This isn't about gratitude, Mom. It's about equal treatment. It's about feeling like my life choices are respected rather than used against me. I don't see why your wedding would need to be extravagant anyway," my mother said dismissively. "Ryan isn't exactly from our social circle. A simple ceremony would be perfectly appropriate for your situation." The casual cruelty of her words left me momentarily speechless. "My situation?" I finally managed. "You mean my relationship with a kind, brilliant man who educates young children and treats me with respect. That situation. You know what I mean, Madison. There's no need to impress anyone with Ryan's background." "I can't do this anymore," I said, standing up. "I'm stepping down as maid of honor." "What?" My mother jumped to her feet. "You can't. The wedding is in 6 weeks. Heather has 5 other bridesmaids. One of them can step up." "This is so selfish of you," my mother accused. "After everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me lately, Mom? Besides make me feel like I'm worth less than my sister at every turn. We raised you. We put a roof over your head, paid for your education. You did the bare minimum for me while giving Heather the world," I interrupted. And I've spent my entire life convincing myself that was okay, that I didn't need what she needed. But the truth is, I just needed to feel equally loved. You're saying we don't love you? My father looked genuinely shocked. I'm saying that if your love is measured by your investment, emotional and financial, then yes, it's pretty clear Heather has always received the lion's share. That's absurd, my father said, anger creeping into his voice. We've been nothing but good parents to you. Good parents don't play favorites, Dad. After everything we've done, this is the thanks we get. My mother's voice broke with emotion. A daughter who accuses us of not loving her enough, because we can't give her a six-figure wedding. This isn't about the money. I nearly shouted, frustration overwhelming me. It's about what the money represents, that Heather's happiness, Heather's choices, Heather's life has always been deemed more important, more worthy of celebration than mine. That no matter what I achieve or who I love, it will never measure up in your eyes. My father stood, face reddening. I think you should leave until you can discuss this rationally. We've never raised you to be entitled or jealous of your sister. Jealous? I laughed incredulously. I'm not jealous of Heather. I'm hurt by you and Mom. There's a difference. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. My phone had been buzzing continuously for the past hour, likely Heather hearing about my maid of honor resignation. When you've calmed down and are ready to apologize, we'll be here, my mother called after me. I turned back one last time. I'm not the one who needs to apologize, Mom. For once in my life, I'm standing up for my worth. Maybe someday you'll understand that. The drive home passed in a blur of tears and racing thoughts. When I arrived at our apartment, Ryan was waiting with open arms and no questions, just quiet support as I released the emotions from the confrontation. After changing into comfortable clothes, I finally checked my phone. 17 texts and 5 voicemails from Heather, ranging from concern to anger to accusations of trying to ruin her wedding. 3 missed calls from various aunts and cousins. The family communication network was clearly in full swing. What do you want to do? Ryan asked as I scrolled through the messages. I think I need some space from all of them, I said, feeling suddenly exhausted. I'm going to block their numbers for a while. Just until I can figure out what healthy boundaries look like. Ryan nodded, kissing my temple. Whatever you need. We'll get through this together. As I blocked one number after another, I felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. Grief for the equal, loving family I'd always wanted but never truly had. Relief from the burden of constantly seeking approval from people who seemed fundamentally unable to give it. 2 weeks passed without contact from my family. I took a few personal days from work, using the time to process my emotions with the help of a therapist Ryan had gently suggested I see. Dr. Carson's office was a calming space with plants and natural light. Unlike the pristine, expensive aesthetic of my mother's world, it felt authentic and welcoming. What I'm hearing, Dr. Carson said during our second session, is that you've spent your life trying to earn love through achievement and responsibility, while watching your sister receive that love apparently unconditionally. I nodded, twisting a tissue between my fingers. Exactly. No matter what I accomplished, it was just expected of me. But Heather was celebrated for the smallest efforts. Have you considered that your parents' behavior reflects their values, not your worth? She asked. Their preferential treatment of Heather says more about them than it does about you. I paused, considering this perspective. What do you mean? Some parents value appearance over substance. Social status over character. When they favor the child who reflects those values, it's not because that child is inherently more valuable, it's because that child mirrors back to them what they want to see in themselves. The simplicity of this observation hit me with unexpected force. My parents' favoritism wasn't a reflection of my inadequacy, but of their own priorities. I've spent my entire life trying to prove myself worthy of the same love they give Heather, I admitted. I became a pediatric nurse partly because I thought saving children would finally make them see my value. And has it? No, I said softly. Nothing ever has. Over the following sessions, Dr. Carson helped me excavate the ways I'd internalized the message that I was less than, how it had affected my self-image, my career choices, even my relationship with Ryan. You chose a profession of caregiving, she noted, where your value is measured by how much you give to others. Does that pattern seem familiar? I thought about my family dynamics, how I'd always been the one to adjust, to accommodate, to put Heather's needs first, because that's what was expected. I'm still trying to prove my worth through what I give rather than who I am. Exactly, Dr. Carson smiled gently. The question now is, what would it look like to value yourself regardless of external validation? That question stayed with me as I gradually returned to normal life. I met my friend Ashley for coffee, someone I'd known since nursing school, who had experienced similar family dynamics with her own brother. When I finally stopped trying to earn my parents' approval, it was like putting down a 100-pound backpack I didn't realize I'd been carrying, Ashley told me as we sat in a cozy cafe near the hospital. It hurt like hell at first, but then I felt lighter. How did you do it? I asked. Just stop caring. Not stop caring, she corrected. Start caring about the right things. About what I think of myself rather than what they think. About building relationships with people who see me clearly rather than trying to fix ones where I'm perpetually misunderstood. That evening, Ryan suggested we have a special dinner at home. He'd prepared my favorite meal and set our small dining table with candles and flowers. What's the occasion? I asked, touched by the gesture. Us, he said simply. I've been thinking a lot about what you've been going through, and I want you to know that I see you, Madison. I see your compassion, your integrity, your strength. Those qualities are worth celebrating every day, not just on special occasions. As we ate, we talked about our future, not in terms of what my parents might approve of, but what would truly fulfill us. What kind of home we wanted to create together. What values we wanted to prioritize. We don't need to build our life in reaction to your parents, Ryan said thoughtfully. Either trying to please them or rebelling against them. We can just build it for us, based on what we believe matters. Later that night, I pulled out my journal and began listing my accomplishments and qualities I valued in myself, not the external markers of success my parents prioritized, but the character traits that defined who I truly was. My compassion for patients. My loyalty to friends. My courage in finally standing up for myself. My capacity to love deeply without conditions. Looking at the list, I felt a shift inside, the first tender shoots of a self-worth not dependent on my parents' approval. It felt fragile, but real, like a seed breaking through soil toward sunlight. The next evening, Ryan and I took a walk around Jamaica Pond, the spring air warm with possibility. As we reached a quiet bench overlooking the water, Ryan suddenly dropped to one knee. Madison, he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. These past weeks have reminded me of what I've always known, that you are the strongest, most genuine person I've ever met. I don't want to wait any longer to ask if you'll marry me. The ring was simple, but beautiful, a small diamond set in a band that I later learned had belonged to his grandmother. It's not flashy, he said almost apologetically. But it has history and meaning. Tears filled my eyes as I realized, this was what genuine love looked like. Not measured by price tags or social status, but by understanding, respect, and acceptance for who I truly was. It's perfect, I said. And yes. 1,000 times yes. As Ryan slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt something settle inside me, a quiet certainty that this was the beginning of building a life defined by our values, not those imposed by others. Let's have the wedding we want, I told him. Something that reflects us, not anyone else's expectations. Ryan smiled, pulling me close. That sounds perfect. A month later, I received a handwritten letter from my father, something so unusual it immediately caught my attention. His precise attorney's handwriting covered 3 pages with no crossing out or corrections, suggesting he'd drafted it multiple times before sending. Dear Madison, it began. I'm writing because I need to speak with you, and I understand why you might not be ready to answer my calls. Would you be willing to meet me for coffee, at that place near your apartment you've mentioned before? Just me. No expectations. I'll be there Saturday, at 2 p.m. if you're willing. I showed the letter to Ryan, uncertain how to respond. It's up to you, he said. But it might provide some closure either way. The cafe was neutral territory, a small local place, where I sometimes grabbed coffee before hospital shifts. When I arrived, my father was already seated at a corner table, looking older and more uncertain than I'd ever seen him. Madison, he said, standing as I approached. Thank you for coming. I sat across from him, not sure what to expect. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he finally said, his confident attorney voice replaced by something more vulnerable. About what you said. About how we've treated you compared to Heather. I waited, giving him space to continue. When I was growing up, I was the practical one in my family, he said, surprising me with this personal revelation. My brother was the charismatic one, the one who got all the attention and praise while I was expected to be responsible. My parents invested more in his interests, celebrated his achievements more enthusiastically. I'd never heard my father speak about his childhood this way. I swore I'd never do that to my children, he continued. But somehow, without realizing it, I recreated the exact same dynamic. I saw myself in you, Madison. Your responsibility, your work ethic, your quiet competence. And instead of making sure you received equal celebration, I fell into the same patterns I experienced. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because you had the courage to say what I never did, he answered, meeting my eyes directly. You stood up for yourself in a way I never stood up to my parents. And it forced me to see what I've been blind to. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket, the kind he'd always used to track household expenses. I went back through our financial records for the past decade. You were right. We've spent nearly 3 times as much on Heather as on you over the years. When I saw the numbers in black and white, I couldn't deny it anymore. It was never about the money itself, I said quietly. I know that now, he nodded. It was about what the money represented, our investment in her happiness and future over yours. Our implicit statement that her choices, her life, deserved more support and celebration than yours. For the first time in my adult life, I saw my father's eyes fill with tears. I'm sorry, Madison. Truly sorry. I failed you as a father by not giving you the same unconditional support and celebration I gave your sister. The simple acknowledgement that I hadn't imagined or exaggerated the disparity, that it had been real and harmful, felt like the first genuine step toward healing. Thank you for saying that, I said. It means a lot to hear you acknowledge it. We talked for nearly 2 hours, moving beyond the initial apology to discuss how we might rebuild our relationship on healthier terms. He told me that my mother was still struggling to understand, but was seeing a therapist herself to work through her reactions. She loves you, Madison. We both do. We just got caught in patterns we didn't recognize, and you suffered for it. As we parted, my father hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Not just for your achievements, but for your courage in standing up for yourself. For being willing to have this conversation, instead of just cutting us off." "I'm working on boundaries, not walls," I told him. Over the following weeks, my mother and I began tentatively reconnecting as well. Our first conversation was awkward and tense, but gradually, as she started to truly listen to my experiences rather than defending her choices, something shifted between us. "I always thought I was doing what was best," she admitted during a walk in the park. "Heather seemed to need more guidance, more support, more everything. You were always so capable. I mistook your self-sufficiency for not needing us as much." "I needed you just as much," I told her. "Just in different ways." The most difficult conversation was with Heather, who initially viewed my actions as a deliberate attempt to ruin her wedding. We met for lunch, just the two of us, at a neutral restaurant halfway between our homes. "I don't understand why you couldn't just be happy for me," she said immediately. "Why did you have to make everything about you?" "I was happy for you," I countered. "For years, I've been genuinely happy for you while quietly accepting less for myself. This wasn't about ruining your wedding. It was about finally acknowledging a pattern that's been hurting me my entire life." As we talked, Heather gradually revealed her own insecurities, how she'd always felt pressure to be spectacular, because it seemed like being ordinary wasn't enough in our family. "You had it easier in some ways," she said. "No one expected you to be perfect all the time. I felt like if I wasn't exceptional, if I wasn't the center of attention, I'd disappear." For the first time, I saw how our parents had damaged both of us with their uneven treatment. Me by making me feel fundamentally less valuable, and Heather by making her feel her worth depended entirely on external validation and accomplishment. We were both shaped by their expectations, I acknowledged. Just in opposite directions. By the time Heather's wedding arrived, we had reached a new understanding. I attended as a guest rather than a member of the bridal party, bringing Ryan as my fiancé. The ceremony was as lavish as expected, but I watched it with different eyes, seeing it not as a reflection of my lesser value, but simply as the celebration Heather had always imagined for herself. A week after the wedding, my parents asked to meet with Ryan and me for dinner. There, they made a surprising announcement. "We want you to know that we've set aside $100,000 for your wedding as well," my father said. "The same amount as Heather's. It's been transferred to an account in your name." I looked at Ryan, then back at my parents. "Thank you, but we've already decided on the wedding we want. A small ceremony in the Boston Public Garden with close friends and family, followed by a reception at our favorite restaurant. It won't cost anywhere near that amount. But we want to make things equal," my mother insisted. "Equality isn't always about identical treatment," I explained. "It's about respecting each person's individual choices and supporting them equally. Our wedding will reflect who we are, just as Heather's reflected who she is." In the end, we accepted their offer to pay for our modest wedding, which cost less than a quarter of what they'd given Heather. The remaining money, at our request, was donated to a scholarship fund for nursing students, creating something meaningful that aligned with our values. Our backyard wedding the following spring was everything we'd wanted: intimate, personal, filled with genuine connections rather than social obligations. My parents, to their credit, supported our choices without trying to upgrade or elaborate on our plans. As I stood with Ryan exchanging vows we'd written ourselves, I realized that the journey of the past year had given me something far more valuable than an expensive wedding. It had given me the courage to define my own worth, to create relationships based on mutual respect rather than validation seeking, and to build a life reflecting values I genuinely believed in rather than those imposed by others. The cycle of favoring one child over another, which had passed from my grandparents to my parents, would end with us. When Ryan and I eventually had children of our own, we would celebrate each one's unique qualities, without using those differences to justify unequal treatment. As our small reception wound down, with fairy lights twinkling in the trees and our closest friends and family sharing stories and laughter, I felt a deep contentment that had nothing to do with price tags or social status. This was the true measure of celebration, not how much was spent, but how much love was present. Life isn't about comparing your journey to someone else's, even your sister's. It's about finding people who value you for exactly who you are, and building a life that reflects your authentic self rather than someone else's expectations. That's the most valuable gift I could have received, worth far more than any dollar amount on a wedding check. Thank you for watching this story. If you've ever felt like the less favored child in your family, or if you've struggled with building healthy boundaries with parents who don't see your worth, please share your experiences in the comments. How did you handle it? What helped you find your own value? Don't forget to like and subscribe if this resonated with you, and share with anyone who might need to hear they're not alone in these family dynamics. Remember, your worth isn't determined by others' ability to see it. It's inherent in who you are.